Folks, this is my friend and San Francisco public defender, Jeff Adachi, and a loyal Cal Bear, I might add.
That's right.
Go Bears. And we're here to talk about the very serious problem that has been exposed by the New York grand jury's decision not to indict the officer who killed Eric Garner using a chokehold or some type of hold. But without my commentary or further commentary, I want this to be Mr. Adachi's platform. Jeff, thank you for your time. First, your thoughts on what happened in New York.
I was watching the news reports yesterday and the protests, and I just can't express how outraged I feel and so many others. It's inexplicable that the grand jury failed to find the officers liable for anything at all, not even gross negligence, not even assault, not to mention homicide. In this case, we had a video that was clear as day that showed Mr. Garner, who was standing there. They claimed that he was, selling loose cigarettes, which I'm surprised you would even detain somebody for that. And you can hear him on the video clearly telling the officers, "Hey, I didn't do anything. Leave me alone." And their response is they jump on him, and immediately an officer applies a chokehold to him, and not only that, but puts his entire weight into that chokehold. And what you see then is a pile-on. It's almost like a football game where you see as many as 5 officers pile on.
Yeah.
And Mr. Garner at this point is exclaiming, "I can't breathe! I can't breathe!" And he's telling them that they're going to kill him if they keep doing what they're doing, and they don't stop. They not only don't stop, but they begin applying more force. And this is a case where the medical examiner ruled it to be a homicide. Now, the medical examiner could have ruled it to be an accidental death or some other cause. So this is a case where the physical evidence, both the video and the medical examiner's report, supported that a crime had been committed. Yet the case was turned over to a secret grand jury. We don't know what evidence that grand jury heard, but they decided not to charge him with any crime. And there were protests throughout the nation because people are just aghast that this could happen. Now, I should say not all people. You have other people, Charles Barkley for a while. And I just couldn't believe it. It's consistent with what he's done in the past, but, others too, who are saying, well, if you get into it with a police officer, if you don't listen to a police officer, this is what happens. I saw a commentator on CNN saying that last night, and it's like, oh, so that gives an officer the right to chokehold you and kill you? So we have a situation again, and this is not an isolated incident. We've had 4 incidents just from last summer, and we have to ask the question, why is this happening? And more specifically, why is this happening to African American men? And why are the officers, who all happen to be white, not being held accountable?
Hey, I'm curious. Tell my viewers, what does a grand jury do? Because there's an idea that the grand jury made a decision and that it said that what he did was essentially legal. But can you shed some light on what grand juries do in the San Francisco case?
Yeah, grand juries are a rare animal. In other words, they're not used very often by prosecutors. Why? Because the prosecutor merely has to review the evidence and determine what charges to file. That's the prosecutor's job. That's a big part of their job. That's what's called prosecutorial discretion. That's how they exercise their power. Now, in rare cases, they will bring a case to a grand jury and let the grand jury decide whether or not the case should be filed. And the grand jury then actually hears evidence. So the prosecutor isn't obligated to do any of this, but they do it sometimes in politically sensitive cases and in cases where in my opinion, they don't want to make the decision. They want somebody else to make the decision, so they say, oh, our hands aren't on this. But the thing of it is that the prosecutor presents the evidence in front of the grand jury. And so the prosecution controls what evidence the grand jury sees. Now, there's an old saying...
It designs the outcome.
Yeah, but there's an old saying about grand juries, I think it was coined by a defense attorney, that you can indict a ham sandwich. Now, that doesn't mean that you would actually want to indict a ham sandwich, but it means that anything can be indicted. Because the grand jury is going to just go along with the prosecutor. The grand jury proceeding is one where only the prosecutor speaks, only the prosecutor presents evidence. And so what we saw in Ferguson, now that the grand jury transcripts have been released, is a very one-sided process. But usually the one-sided process favors the state because the state is able to say, so-and-so committed a crime, so-and-so did this. We have all these witnesses to show that. That's not what happened in Ferguson. In Ferguson, the district attorney, in my opinion, I looked at the transcripts, went out of their way to defend the officer's actions and to impugn the reputation of Michael Brown, who was the person that they were supposed to be representing in that action. Let me give you some examples. I have transcripts here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people may not get the subtleties of what happened here, but I hope you do. When the prosecutor, her name is Miss Alizadeh, is questioning Dorian Johnson, who was the companion, the eyewitness, who was with Michael Brown, she refers to Michael Brown as being brash. She says, that's like indignant. She says, in describing him, and that was threatening. He was threatening, don't you think? He is 6'5" tall. She says at one point, that would be extremely intimidating in describing Michael Brown, and then says, this is at the point when the officer encounters Mr. Brown and his friend, says, question, and you see cop cars coming by, oh my God, but Big Mike, referring to Michael Brown, doesn't really care, does he? Now, as a prosecutor, why would you present your witness in that way?
Yeah.
And when Michael Brown was walking out of the store, and allegedly there was a theft that occurred there, she says, asks this question. He owns the street right there, kind of. And the witness says, I don't want to say he thought he owned the street. So she's portraying him as a thug, trying to make it seem that the officer would have had every reason to do what he did. This is another example, and this is how it can be very subtle, because, again, the officer claims something derogatory said to him, and there's no evidence of that from the friend. And the prosecutor asked the friend, is it possible that Big Mike, who is behind you now, could have said something to the officer as the officer pulled away, could have said something ignorant? So she's suggesting that Michael Brown is saying things to the officer, is being indignant, is being brash, owns the street, and essentially all of these things operate to present him in the worst light. In other words, if they're not presenting somebody as a human being, it's much easier for the jury just to say, you know what, we're going to go with the police officer in this case, and that's exactly what they did. They called multiple officers who essentially said, well, I would have done the same thing. They had another officer, because originally Darren Wilson, the police officer, told the first officer that he talked to that he shot his gun 4 times. In fact, he shot it 12 times. And what they do is they put an officer on the stand and say, hey, have you been involved in an officer-involved shooting? Have you shot someone before? Yes, I have. Have you mistaken the number of shots that you shot when you fired your gun? Yes, it happens all the time. And so what they're doing in a very subtle way, in a direct way, is they're setting up, all of the factors needed so there'll be no indictment. And that's what is insane about what you see throughout the Michael Brown grand jury proceedings. What you don't know is what happened in New York, but you have the video, and that's why people are outraged. And there was a young man on CNN yesterday saying, "What do we have to do?" He was wearing a suit. He was, "What do I have to do?" He's an African American man.
I remember that.
And I have a suit and tie on, and still I'm getting stopped, and still I'm getting harassed. And a lot of people who aren't black, including Asians and whites and others, they don't get it. They think, well, it doesn't happen to me, so what are these people complaining about?
Yeah, I'm curious, what would you like to see done? If you could wave your magic wand, or you have a very powerful position, what would you like to see done so that these outcomes are less likely to happen?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to realize that the bias that results in judgments in these cases, which result in a fatal outcome, are the result of judgments. And we have to own those judgments. And those biases exist in all of us. Perhaps Officer Darren Wilson isn't aware of all the biases that caused him to think that Michael Brown looked like a demon, or that he was just by looking at him, made certain judgments about what he had to do.
I should add that it's alleged that his wife is part of the KKK around there. Just saying, it's all over the internet.
But the thing that we have to do is begin dealing honestly with these issues. And I think that the work that you've been doing in social media, getting the word out there, that's important because people are starting to dialogue. And we're becoming closer in terms of at least an understanding of our respective positions. People will not agree on this issue, but we're getting closer. Now, does that move the needle to the extent that we're going to see reform in our police departments? No, it hasn't gotten to that level. And then we need to do some concrete things like body cameras. I've been a long proponent of body cameras and for police officers. And in police departments that have used body cameras, we've seen, in California, we've seen a decrease in the police complaints, 30 to 40%, and a reduction of officer-involved shootings. Why? Because they know they're on camera. Now, some might say, well, in the Eric Garner case, the police obviously knew they were on camera, and they didn't care, and it didn't matter that they were on camera. And so that's, again, the body camera is just a tool to collect evidence, and hopefully will have some effect on behavior. But we still have the problem of officers not being held accountable. Now, people always ask me, why is that? Why do officers always get off? We have a case going on right here in San Francisco involving officer corruption, and the question is, how will the jury perceive police officer charged with crime? Well, citizens don't want to believe that police are capable of doing bad things. And because why? Because most people look to the police for protection and safety, and they don't want to believe that. The other thing is that in presenting these cases, remember the prosecutor and the police are like this. They rely on each other all the time. And so the reality is, if you're a prosecutor, you're not going to go hard against a police officer in most cases. That's not always the case, and so in a situation like this, we should have had a special prosecutor appointed. They did this in the past. I remember when Oliver North was prosecuted, they brought in John Kicker from San Francisco, one of the top defense attorneys, to be a prosecutor. And I think that is an excellent idea, that we need to bring in independent lawyers who are going to do a professional job in terms of prosecuting these cases, because you cannot trust a local prosecutor to go after its own police department. Why? Because, again, the district attorney is elected, the district attorney needs the support of the police. They're not going to want to do anything that upsets the police department because it's going to have an impact on their cases. So, in my view, even though it's not a legal conflict of interest, it is something that is going to result, again, in these kinds of outrageous outcomes.
Quick question. Kate Conjure on Twitter put a picture up of San Francisco police officers, and there was an eerie tableau, I'll insert it right here, all white male. Is that part of the problem? We need a more diverse police force. I want to say something. I'm not putting down everyone that happens to be white, male, and police officers, because I know a lot who are, who frankly speaking give me a lot of great information. But the whole point is, there is a problem there. Your thoughts?
It's very important that police forces be diverse. And in San Francisco, we are fortunate because Chief Greg Sir, has made diversity a priority, and we have a very diverse police force. Yet, when often you see, the police represented in most places, and I should say that that's not the case in most places. For example, if you look at in Ferguson, if you look at in Jennings, where Officer Gary Wilson came from, you had basically an all-white police force policing a black community. And that is something that has been a constant in many places. It not only makes it harder to build trust because you don't have people on the police force who can identify with the community or the community can identify with, but you also don't have the sensitivity if you're not from that neighborhood. Taking race apart, if you're coming from a completely different place and you're asked to come into, say, a community that you have no idea or no contact with, it's going to be hard for you to do it. Now, is it true that officers can be trained to be sensitive? And it's not, it's not only being sensitive. It's like acknowledging your bias, understanding it. Recently, at our office, the Public Defender's Office in San Francisco, we started a racial justice effort. And so part of what we're doing is we're raising issues that relates to race, because we know that, for example, African Americans and Latinos are incarcerated at a higher rate. We know that the bails are higher. We know that the judges and prosecutors tend to be harder on African American males and Latino males. And so we're raising these issues just to raise consciousness amongst the judges. And I think that's so important because people think, oh, I'm not biased, I am fair and I don't have any prejudices, when the reality is that we all do.
Right.
And so part of the dialogue, and I hope it's starting to sink in and people are becoming more entrenched, is an openness to understand how bias works. There's a test that I would recommend everybody take called the implicit association test, and it's one that was developed by Harvard. You go online, just look for implicit association test. And what it does is it tests our unconscious reactions to race and to other issues based on what we're exposed to. And what's fascinating about it is that it shows that a part of our brain called the amygdala has a response. It's kind of the fight or fear part of your brain, has a physiological response to an image. So if you see, let's say, a white male walking across the street and towards you, you're going to get an entirely different reaction if you happen to be white or not black, and then you see an image of a black male going to the fireworks that are going off in your brain. And what's important is to acknowledge that. They've done also tests where they've asked judges to sentence people based on the same crimes over a period of time, and they found that on average, African American males receive 30 to 40% higher sentences than their white counterparts for the same crime, and the same thing is true for bail. So we have to become aware of this, and one of the reasons I'm speaking out on these issues is because I see this as an opportunity to talk about the injustice in the juvenile justice and criminal justice system. And I thank you for the opportunity to talk about these issues.
Some advice before we close. I know your time is extremely valuable, and I'm blessed to have you here. What advice do you have for San Franciscans, particularly San Franciscans of color, when they're encountered by the police? What should they do? How should they conduct themselves? And can they use their smartphone to record what the officer does?
Yeah, absolutely, you can use your phone to record. That is something protected by the First Amendment. Now, will you get harassed? Yeah, probably. But you have a right to do that, and you should exercise that. There are different approaches. When an officer comes up to you and starts asking you questions and they have no right to, you can walk away. You don't have to say anything at all. And the whole debate that I saw last night on one of the news channels, they were talking about, well, no, you shouldn't do that. Well, that's your right to do that. You don't have to engage with the officer. But I think what most people say is to be safe, just tell the officer, I don't have anything to say, I'm on my way, and go on. Now, does that mean that they're not going to harass you or they're not going to stop you? No, there's no guarantees against that. And that's one of the problems, like with I think how police are trained too, is that they have to understand that if a citizen elects to walk away and they do not have probable cause or a reasonable suspicion to detain them, they have to let them go. And a lot of officers, don't.
Wow, you just, if I may, you opened up something really powerful, because every police officer I've talked to and everything that I've read and seen always says, well, if you just follow what I tell you to do. But what you're basically saying is that I don't have to.
Right. But we have to also remember...
To a degree.
Yeah, we have to also remember that's what Eric Garner did. Eric Garner said, I don't want to deal with you. I'm tired of it. And, he didn't... They kept saying that he was resisting arrest. No, he wasn't. He was standing there expressing that he did not want to be harassed by the police. And you saw what happened to him. And one of the most poignant moments on the news last night was I saw an African-American mother in Oakland talking about what she has to tell her son in order to survive. That as soon as you stop for a traffic infraction, you put your hands up. Any interaction with the police, you put your hands up. And that's the only way that you can save your life. That's a sad commentary on American society. And I think this is a problem, and President Obama said that this is a problem that we all have to take to heart. Let's drop our defenses. Let's forget about, trying to justify our positions and ask, how would you feel if you were the family member of Eric Garner? How would you feel if that happened to your loved one?
In closing, how can people contact your office if they ever find themselves in a situation and need your help?
They can call the Public Defender's Office. Our number is 415-553-1671. Our website is sfpublicdefender.org. And I would really encourage people to engage. We're starting a new program on the government channel called Justice Matters. And we're actually shooting our first episode today. It's a 30-minute show talking about criminal justice issues. But we need to get people engaged so they understand how this happens. One of the problems is when you don't understand how the system works or doesn't work, you become very disempowered because you don't think you can do anything about it. We need to inform people of what their rights are, so when people begin, fighting for these issues, they're able to make measurable progress. I mean, I think one of the good things that came out of the protests is the president saying that he's going to devote a certain amount of money to body cameras. I mean, that is a positive change, and that will result in
it's funny you mention that really quick, because my friend Davey D mentioned on Facebook, he says, okay, we have this video showing that an officer obviously killed Eric Garner, and yet, so what good are body cameras going to do? But, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Yeah.
Well, there's been actually tests and studies on body cameras, and it has shown that overall it results in officers censoring themselves. If the officer knows they're on video, they're not going to use excessive force because they know they're going to be held accountable. And that's something that may be obvious, but it's true. Now, it's a whole different question whether an officer is going to be prosecuted for a crime if they're seen on video committing a crime. And as I said earlier, the bias that citizens have in favor of police officers, as well as the prosecutors and judges and others, aren't willing to hold officers accountable. This is something that starts at the top.
Right.
We have officers who sometimes lie in court. We had that situation here in San Francisco. Yet a lot of judges didn't hold them accountable. And
even if they show up, because I remember I had a DUI, and the guy had me up like this. I actually made a video about post, and as I was about, he was handcuffed me like this was in 2006, and I was crying. Like, I had this and the tears were starting to flow, and he goes, oh, you're going to do that, huh? And he body slammed me on his car. So Bill Dubois was my attorney, and we had him come to court twice. He never showed up.
Wow.
Ever.
Did you sue? Did you bring a lawsuit? Or?
No, I'd still love to. You know, I talked to Bill about it. It was more like, forget it. But now, this was before I started Zenny 62 Media and everything. And if you think about the timing, 2006, it was just the advent of social media, right? But now I'm talking and saying, hey, look, this happened to me too. And the court, the judge never made him show up. He didn't come twice.
And having gone through that experience, you understand, and you have a different perspective than a person who hasn't gone through that experience. When you watch the Eric Garner tape, you understand what
Oh, get this, Jeff. Hey, even better, what happened was when I was going across the bridge, and actually I was having beers with, remember Bill O'Keefe and those guys, right? We were at the Balboa Cafe, okay? And so I'm driving across. I'm doing maybe like 65. There's a guy tailgating me, forcing me to speed up. So I'm thinking, hey, if I go over to this highway patrol officer and get in front of him, that guy will leave me alone, which is how I wound up. So I did. The guy that was tailgating went by me, okay, at obviously a high rate of speed.
Yeah.
But the officer didn't go after him.
He went after you, right?
Yeah, and so as soon as I got across the bridge, the lights fly, I pulled over, did everything I was supposed to do. He goes, don't worry, we're going to let you go. And he's talking to his partner. He goes, oh, well, this is how you do it. And then I just realized, hey, he's lying to me, and I just did this. He goes, oh, you're going to do that, huh? And boom. So then he says, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm out of here after 4 hours, right? It was 3 days because he wrote that I delayed arrest. Yeah. I mean, unbelievable stuff.
But consistent with what we know, the San Francisco Police Department's own statistics. And I asked an officer I was cross-examining the other day about this. An African-American male is 4 times as likely as their white counterpart to be stopped for a traffic violation. And again, what happens is that these officers, because the officer said, oh, no, I don't do that. I asked, well, how many people of color have you stopped versus white people, over the last 6 months? Oh, I don't know. I don't look at the color. Yeah, everybody looks at the color. And, part of the determination that an officer makes, either consciously or unconsciously, is, there's a black guy driving a car, and that registers at some level. Doesn't mean they're going to stop you right away, but they're going to register at some level that, oh, that's the person I'm going to stop. And that's the kind of judgment that results in these unnecessary and tragic deaths. So, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
And please enjoy your visit.
And happy holidays and Merry Christmas to you.
Yeah, you too.
All right, cool.